Hi, and welcome to this week's lesson. In this week's lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to start a new project and we're going to get user authentication. We're going to get a database working. We're going to get user authentication, which is signing in, signing up, and signing out of an application working. And we're going to have that all deployed onto Heroku. Now, that sounds like a lot, and it kind of is, but Laravel makes it easy, and you'll see that it's actually a little bit of work, but not too much. So let's get started. So we're going to do a new project from scratch. Yes, you have to do a new project from scratch. So we're going to go and I'm going to do 7.1 and making my new project, and I'm going to click on create, and I want it in my current window, and I'm going to terminate. And so now what I want to do is I want to just open up my terminal view. And what I'm going to do now is just type in Laravel new. And basically, we're just going to do what we've been doing, but we're going to add a few more steps to it because we never got a database connected to Laravel and never did anything like that. So what's going to happen is we're going to end up using the SQLite database, which is not a database server, it's a file. And the advantage to SQLite in development is that it's a simple database, it's a file, and if you had to move your database from one person to another for some reason, you could just send the file and you don't have to send a whole server and go through that whole circus. So SQLite's really easy for local development and works just fine, but we're going to want to use the Postgres database server, which is a very popular database management system that is open source and widely used and is basically superior to MySQL, and a lot of people use it in industry. So what's going to happen is locally we're going to use MySQLite, and then remotely we're going to use Postgres on Heroku, and there's not really going to be any problem with that, because one of the advantages to Laravel is that it doesn't care what kind of database it uses. It just needs the proper connection information to connect to it, and then its database driver can translate any queries or anything like that into whatever database backend you'd like to use. So now that we have the Laravel project installed, let's make sure that it's working. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up to Tools, or come up to Run, and go to here, Run Configuration, and I'm going to edit the configuration. I'm going to click on Add PHP script, server, single instance, pick the file, type the serve command, click on this. You're going to run the launch the web browser. Click on OK and click apply, and then let's check everything, and we should be good, so we can run. And let's see, we got Laravel started up. Now the next thing we're gonna have to do is get Laravel configured to work with SQLite. So I'm just gonna close this down, I don't need this, and I'm gonna open up the Laravel project, and there's a couple, oops, I don't want that, I want this. There's a couple things we need to do. So in Laravel, you have this thing, there's two places where we're going to be going back and forth in today. But in Laravel, you have this .env file. And the .env file is for this local environment that we have right here. And what happens is that in Postgres, in Heroku, it has its own .env file. So we're going to make some changes here, but then actually there's going to be a .env file for Heroku that we remotely edit, and you'll see whenever we do that. So here's what I'm going to do here. So for my local .env file, and the reason why we have .env files is basically you may not want to give access to the source code to your program to untrusted individuals, and this way you can give them a place, the .env file, to edit and add passwords and credentials and things like that to configure an application. It just centralizes all of the configuration information. So here I'm going to type in db connection, and db connection I'm going to change from MySQL to SQLite. It's SQLite, and then I'm going to do db underscore database equals, and what we have to do is we have to make an SQLite database file. So it's real easy to do, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come over to my database folder, and I'm going to right click and go new file, and I'm going to type in database.sqlite, SQLite, because remember SQLite's just a database file. So I'm going to click on OK, and it creates a new database file, and we can't do anything with it, so I'm just going to close it. But what I have to do is I have to get the full path. So I'll right click on it, and let's see if I can get the full path. Oops, I don't want to do that. Let's see if I can right click and see if there's an easy way to get the copy path. There we go. And so I just db, and I have to have the full path to that database file. And what we're going to want to do is just go view, tools, and terminal, and we're going to want to see if this is able to work. So if our SQLite database is functioning, then what we should be able to do is I should be able to type in PHP artisan migrate. And what migrate means is that Laravel basically, and this is a term that's used in other places for the same thing, it's migrations are database upgrade and creation scripts. So upgrades keep track or migrations keep track of changes to your database schema. So this is where we're going to eventually put our database schema. But here, Laravel comes built in with a database schema for users, user authentication. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do PHP artisan migrate, and it says down the bottom, migration table successfully created. We created the users table, the passwords table, and we can check that by clicking on the SQLite, going up to view, tools window, database, and then I'm going to do new data source, SQLite, and it might tell you on this screen that you have to install a driver. We already did that. If on your computer you don't have it gave you a problem about having a database driver whenever you ran that PHP artisan command, what happens is you have to install SQLite, and I'm gonna paste this in. You have to install SQLite, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. Here, I'm just gonna test it, and I click OK, and then I can see inside the database. But what I was saying is, I forgot to do this earlier. You probably have to install the SQLite driver, which is sudo apt-get install php-sqlite3. and I already have it, so I don't, it's going to tell me I already have it, but it's sudo apt-get install php-sqlite 3, and you can search Google for it and it will tell you. If you search for Ubuntu SQLite, it will tell you how to install SQLite. And I'll put the command in. So I got in here, it'll show me that I have schemas main, and these are the files that were created, so, or tables that were created. Basically with databases, you have these tables like migrations, passwords, resets, and then you have fields, ID, name, password, and the organization of a database. People think of like MySQL, SQL, which is or Postgres. These are database servers. These have an X number of databases. They can, it's not unlimited, but they can have a lot of databases. And then each database consists of tables and fields. And in a relational database, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up creating relationships where we connect one field to another field, which is called a primary key. We're going to connect one field to another, but we don't need to worry about that right now. Laravel does all this for us, for users. And so now that I have this set up, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to come down to my command line here and go clear. And what we're going to do is we're going to type in PHP artisan make :auth. And what this is going to do is this is going to generate a new set of templates for us, like Blade templates that have the user authentication, login and password forms, the password, the login, registration, and update our template, our homepage template, and give us a dashboard. So it does a bunch of stuff. So just to get user authentication in PHP or in Laravel, once you get the database connected, you just type PHP artisan make auth, and it says authentication scaffolding generated successfully. So I can go up here and let's try to run this program. So we're going to run it. And up here you can see in the corner that now I have a login and register button. So I'm gonna have put my name in and register, and I register it, and I'm in there, and now I gotta log out, and I can log out, and I can log in, or I can log in again, and I'm logged in. And so this is a fully functional, relatively secure user authentication part of your application. And this is what we're going to do for the rest. We're going to work with this for the rest of the semester, because we're going to see how to connect database records with our user accounts and do different types of database queries and just generally work with this. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we want to get this all hooked up on Heroku, because this is where things, I think, get a little bit more in depth. It's not too much, but there's a little bit we gotta work on. All right, so how do we get this thing connected to Heroku? So there's a few things that we got to do. So the first thing that we got to do is we got to configure, we got to set up Laravel to understand how to talk to Heroku's Postgres database. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come over into a folder called config, and we're going to go to a file, database.php. In the database.php file, we have to make two changes. So the first change is, and I'm going to give you guys a cheat sheet on all these commands as well. So I have to paste this in. It's a long thing, but basically just telling it where to get the username and password for logging into the Postgres database once this thing goes to Heroku. And then we got to get another bit of code here, and what I do with that is I have to copy it and paste it down at the bottom here as the last thing under SQL Serve. So it's PG Heroku, and it tells you a bunch of stuff about Heroku, or about the database driver that was. So up top, it basically grabs the configuration information, and in here, it uses the configuration information for the Heroku database. All right. So I'm going to save this, and then we're going to just run the server to make sure that it's still everything happily runs and everything is still running. We're still logged in, and because we're using the Postgres database locally, we're not using the Heroku database or the Postgres database on Heroku. I'm just going to log out, and I'm going to close this down because I don't need it, and then we're going to start running a series of commands here. So let's go and open up the terminal here. And so here are commands. So I'm going to come down here, and the first thing that I got to do is I'm just going to do a git init. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a pros file. Now I found out why some of you are having problems with page not found, or access forbidden. It's that the pros file isn't being made. I've noticed that sometimes when I paste it, it doesn't have the arrow right before pros file, but I fixed it and this has it. So if you get access forbidden, it's that your pros file is messed up. There's either no pros file existing, and if there's no pros file existing, it's because there's no arrow. Because all the pros file is just has this web vendor bin Heroku PHP Apache 2 public. That has to be there for Heroku to understand your application. The next thing is that we're going to set the application name. So I'm going to call it IS601. And then we're going to run a series of commands here. Heroku apps create. And that $ app name is just using the app name that we set up at the top. That's a variable. And so we're just going to create the app. And we're just going to run the next command here. And I'm going to keep on running these commands. And that last command was just adding the Heroku Postgres add-on. And now we're going to have to generate our app key for Heroku. Wait a second, hold on. Got a bad paste job here. Now the next thing I'm going to do is set the error log on Heroku. Now I'm going to set the environment to debug, so we get better log messages on Heroku. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell my Heroku to use the PG Heroku database configuration that we did earlier. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to VCS and I'm going to commit all of my project and say Laravel auth setup for Heroku. I'm going to commit everything. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to do a git push Heroku master. And it's working. And let's type in Heroku open. And we have our app. Now here's the thing. This is where it gets, we have login. All right, and we can click on register. So let's try to register now. We're going to get an error. And see, whoops, we got a query exception. Users does not exist. And the reason users does not exist is that we need to run our migration on Heroku. And the way it works is you just type in Heroku before the Heroku run, and then the command that you want to run that's a Laravel command. So what I do is I come back over to here and I do Heroku run PHP artisan migrate. And what's going to happen is it's just going to run that PHP artisan migrate that we did on our own local on Heroku. So every time you make database changes and then send your code to Heroku, you're going to have to run that PHP artisan migrate command. So now let's go back to here and we're going to just refresh and we'll actually resubmit our, and we're logged in. And so now we have an app that we can log into deployed to Heroku using the Postgres database. So that's about all you need to do for this week. And I'm going to post all of the commands on Moodle, and there's going to be a little assignment just to complete this so that I know that you have been able to configure your system to work with Heroku and a database. Okay, take care, and I will talk to you next week.